Chapter 8. Cece. I was startled awake by banging on the front door. I was a light sleeper, and immediately I hopped up and opened my bedroom door at the same time Mel did. "Who the hell is knocking on our door so late?" she asked, and another set of impatient bangs came. We both rushed down the stairs. Something in my gut told me it was an emergency, so of course I yanked the door open without checking outside first. We were greeted by an awful scene. My mother, father, two other older people, and a soccer coach from my school were trying to carry a huge, bleeding man. "Oh my God! In! Put him on the couch!" I yelled at them, opening the door as wide as I could. They all struggled, but managed to get him inside without dropping him. This man was large, and I didn't mean obese. I meant he was probably halfway to being 7 feet tall, and a mountain of muscle. Even more muscle than Oliver, and Oliver was very muscular. "What happened?" I asked when they laid him down. "We were attacked by a vampire," Riley Tesler, my school's soccer coach, answered. I was acquainted with her and knew she was in the Silver Lake Coven, but I had never gotten to know her well. "A vampire? They still exist?" I placed my hand over the bleeding man's throat and called to the warm, familiar light inside of me. Exposed muscle bulged from the long, bloody furrows in the man's neck. It looked like an animal had bitten and ripped through his skin. I used all of my power to knit his flesh and muscle back into place. It only took a moment, but all of my energy was sapped. "They do," my mother answered, "but I had never expected them to so blatantly attack witches like this. Not after the curse." "Is he a warlock?" I asked, looking down at his unfamiliar face. "No, he's a human visiting from Russia, but he was able to fight off the vampire. He protected me." Riley bent down to sit on the floor next to him. "That's incredible. This man must be unbelievably strong." I stood and backed away, swaying a little. Healing any injury always drained me, but a serious injury like this made me so weak I could barely stand. "This is the third attack. The first two were witches, and both were murdered," the older lady, who I assumed was Riley's mother, informed. "I know. The thing is, the second murder wasn't a vampire attack. The second woman had her heart ripped out. Why would a vampire do that?" My father, the chief of police, sighed in frustration. "Where were you two attacked?" "Near a cabin that Nikolai is renting in the mountains. Here, I'll give you the address." Riley pulled out a pen and an old receipt from her pocket and jotted down the address. "I'll head that way after I call some backup." "Be careful. Do not go up there alone," my mother whispered as she kissed my father's cheek. I had stumbled back and leaned against my sister for support. "I'm taking Cece upstairs to bed. Bloody guy on the couch can stay, but you all need to clear out," Mel demanded, catching a better hold on me. My vision began to blur a bit. "I can't leave him," Riley exclaimed. "Fine, but you'll have to sleep on the floor. Everyone else, out." My wonderful sister helped me up to a living chair and then shooed everyone else out of the house. "Riley," I caught her attention, "there are some towels and soap in that closet. The pantry in the kitchen has a big enough bowl to fill with hot water. Please grab them for me." Riley smiled thankfully and scurried off. When she got back, she had a big bowl full of soapy water, towels, and scissors. I watched her use the scissors to cut off Nikolai's bloody shirt. She was very careful. Worry lined her face. "Thank you, Cecilia," she said as she began to wash the blood off Nikolai. "No problem," I whispered, closing my eyes. A few more minutes passed, and Mel came stomping in the room with an armful of blankets and pillows. "We don't have a blow-up bed or anything, so this will have to do." She dropped everything in a heap next to Riley. Nikolai was on the couch, and he was so tall that his feet and part of his legs were hanging off the end. "Thank you guys so much. I was so scared he was going to die." "How long have you known him?" I asked. Riley looked at her watch. "About 6 hours." Mel and I looked at each other stunned. The way Riley was looking at Nikolai, you would think she had known him forever. I heard 2 quick taps on the window behind me, then another 2 familiar taps. "Star?" I asked, twisting in my chair to open the window blinds. I found my familiar Star sitting on the windowsill. "Hey girl, who is this?" I asked when I noticed a fat raccoon sitting next to her. I slid the window open and the raccoon slipped and fell onto my chair. Star, on the other hand, very gracefully perched on my shoulder. I made sure to lock my window before turning back around. "Did you just let a rodent into our house?" Mel hissed in horror. "He's mine," Riley defended, "and he is very well behaved. Most of the time. His name is Sly." Riley held her arms open and the raccoon went running towards her, but instead of going into Riley's waiting arms, he jumped right past her and onto Nikolai. I watched as Sly took his adorable little raccoon hands and softly patted Nikolai's face. When Nikolai didn't wake up, Sly looked at Riley and made a few little chittering noises. "He's okay, just sleeping," she told him, petting his head. After that, Sly curled up on Nikolai's chest. "Speaking of familiars, I think I locked Yo-Yo in my bedroom when we came down here. He's probably pissed. Stupid cat," Mel sighed. "Cece, let's go to bed." I felt horribly ill, but I nodded and did my best to stand on my own. "He will be fine by morning, Riley," I assured her before heading up to bed. I put Star on her perch and gave her a quick kiss before laying down. The night had gone from 0 to 100 in the span of a mere minute. Vampire attacks, murder, Russians with the strength of vampires. I just needed to sleep this insanity off. Unknown. I closed the front door, leaning against it with a soft sigh. I had just gotten back from the most wonderful blind date with the most amazing guy. He was handsome and a complete gentleman. I planned to call him back for sure. After I composed myself, I headed down my hall and to the room, where I began to change into something more comfortable. I started by kicking off my heels and letting down my long hair. That was when I heard a scratching sound, followed by a knock. I froze, confused by who could be at my door this late. Was it perhaps my date? He did drive me home. I sighed with a small smile. "Coming," I called out as I headed down the hall and towards the door. There was another knock, and I quickly pulled the door open. "Hey, did you forget something?" I asked. There was no one there, so I stepped outside to have a look around. "Hello?" I called out. After a few moments of no reply, I headed back inside, closing my door and locking it. I started moving back towards my room, but stopped as I caught something moving out of the corner of my eye. It was a shadow of some kind, standing in my kitchen. I quickly summoned up my inner strength, making myself blend into a wall. The intruder couldn't see me now. My ability was to camouflage myself, with my surrounding making me impossible to see. I made my way into the kitchen, seeing the figure better now. It was long and skinny with a round head and stringy hair. It was rummaging through my garbage, spilling it onto the floor. What was it looking for? Suddenly it stopped and perked up, turning around now. It had huge black eyes with red pupils and long sharp white teeth. A ghoul? I couldn't really tell. It was beginning to sniff the air, looking around. It felt me in the room. It knew I was watching. Suddenly it tensed up and its eyes fell on me. Could it see me? My heart stopped and I held my breath. I kept my mask up, willing myself to stay hidden from the creature, but it kept its eyes on me. Slowly it turned and began walking on all fours towards me, looking into my eyes. It was too close. It leaned back on its hind legs like it would pounce on me. It had seen me. I'd wasted no time, darting from the kitchen and heading towards my bedroom, slamming the door. I heard a loud thunk and then another. I pulled my dresser over, blocking the door. I needed to hide. There was another loud thunk. It was trying to break through. The dresser began to shake as the creature continued to hit it. I had to hide quick. I headed for my closet and shut myself inside. I buried myself among my fallen clothes and waited, cupping my hands over my mouth and closing my eyes. I camouflaged myself once again, praying silently. I heard the dresser squeal across the floor, and what sounded like wood splintering, followed by the scratching sound of a creature moving into my room. It was panting like it was out of breath. Maybe I could fight it if necessary. I kept my eyes closed but waited. The room fell quiet, but I refused to move. I waited and waited for what seemed like hours. Suddenly I felt warm air on my face and I froze, slowly opening my eyes. I was greeted by a pair of red orbs staring back at me. I screamed and it opened its mouth wide, showing off blood-stained teeth. Then it grabbed my ankle, dragging me from the closet. I rolled on my stomach and reached for one of my heels as it pulled me out. I rolled onto my back and lunged forward, stabbing it through the eye. It howled and released me. I got to my feet, heading for my door, and climbed over the broken-down dresser. With haste, I threw myself into the hallway and towards my front door. That was when it jumped on my back, slamming my face into the closet wall. It growled in my ear and grabbed my hair, pulling me back. I screamed and thrashed, moving around as much as I could. I couldn't escape. My heart was pounding so fast, and I couldn't breathe. I was panicking. It flipped me onto my back, and I stared up at its awful face with its bloody eye. It was angry. Its claws began to stab into my flesh. It leaned in, biting into my shoulder, tearing away my skin. I could see my flesh in between its teeth, along with blood. It grinned at me, and I felt nothing but pain. sharp blades cutting through me and peeling skin back. I screamed and screamed. It hurt so badly, and soon, so soon, I began to go numb, and all I could see was the creature eating its fill. Mel. I awoke unable to breathe. A huge ball of orange fur sat on my face. I pushed it off, and my cat fell onto the floor. Sitting up, I groaned, "Yo-Yo, are you trying to suffocate me?" I asked my grumpy cat as it curled up on the floor as if nothing happened. He yawned in response and looked away from me. I glared at him before climbing out of bed. Last night had been rough, and I just wasn't ready to take on the day. What was going to happen now? 2 murders and a vampire attack? Surely there was more to this weird story. I made my way down the stairs and into the living room. Our 2 guests were still sound asleep. Riley didn't leave the man's side for a second. She was worried, and it was easy to tell by the way she was laying. She had her head on the edge of the couch, using her arms for a pillow as she sat. He was sprawled out comfortably, with his legs dangling over the edge. Weirdos. Just out of curiosity, I went to inspect the huge man's wounds. Where there had been mangled tissue, there was now scabbing and swelling. It was clear to see that Cece had put things back together, and his body was finishing its healing processes. I turned away, heading into the kitchen to see Cece, dressed and ready for work. She was cleaning up her dishes in the sink. Where do you think you're going?" I asked her as I leaned in the doorway, my arms crossed over my chest. "To work," she said, looking at me, that sweet smile on her face. "Cece, you can't go to work. You need more rest after healing that huge Russian, and not to mention we have 2 house guests here," I whispered, glaring at her. I didn't know these 2 very well, and I was rather worried about my sister's health. "Mel, first off, don't call him the huge Russian. That's so rude. And second, Miss Riley is in our coven and works at the school with me. We can trust her," my sister defended with a nod. "Yeah, but still, it's weird to just leave them here," I told her. Besides that, I had planned to bug Oliver today. I couldn't do that if we had guests here. I felt weird just leaving them in the house. "Look, Mel, you're off work today, so just stay with them if you're so concerned," she said with a shrug. "I can't. I have plans," I told her. "Plans?" she said, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. "Yes, I totally do. I was actually about to go to the coffee shop and—" "Mel, don't you dare bother Oliver with one of those silly schemes of yours. We have enough going on," she lectured, pointing at me. "Hey, I wasn't plotting a silly scheme," I shot back, glaring at her. "Oh? Then what was it you were going to do today?" she asked, raising an eyebrow with her arms crossed. She reminded me of Mom when she got like this. "Well, I just planned to visit him and talk," I said with a roll of my eyes. "Obviously," I added. "In all honesty, Oliver and I planned to investigate Mr. Perfect today after he got off work. Couldn't tell Cece that, though. She'd kill me if she knew." "Uh-huh. Mel, I don't know what you're plotting, but I'm on to you," she warned before turning away. "Look, Mom and Dad are home and can take care of things. If you really need to go out, then by all means," she told me before she grabbed her keys and headed out. "Have a good day," she called out to me. I sighed, shaking my head. "You too," I mumbled, trying to bury the worry I felt for her. There was no way she was completely okay. Stubborn sister of mine. I headed back to my room and got ready. I just pulled on a simple pair of dark tattered jeans with a comfortable teal sweatshirt. I laced up my black Converse shoes and headed out the door, making sure to let my parents know I was heading out to see Oliver before I left. The coffee shop known as Kingsland Coffee wasn't too far, so within no time I was there. As I got out of the car, though, I was stopped. "Mel," a playful voice called out from across the street. I groaned and turned to see a smiling Colt. "You really are a stalker," I said, shoving my hands into the pockets of my hoodie. He crossed the street to meet me and bowed gracefully. "I'm more of an admirer, if you will," he teased with a wink. I rolled my eyes and looked away. "What do you want?" I asked. "Nothing. I just saw you and wanted to say hi to my future wife," he replied. "Shut up. The only thing in our future is a restraining order if you keep this up," I warned before walking towards the coffee shop. "Oh, come on, Mel. Don't be so cold. What brings you out this way?" he asked. "I'm here to see Oliver. We have plans," I hissed over my shoulder. "Plans? I see. So you'll make plans with him, but not me?" he asked. "Look, it doesn't concern you, weirdo," I shot back. "Yes, it does. If it's about you, then it concerns me," he told me. I turned to him and looked up. "Why are you like this?" I growled, glaring up into his playful eyes. Colt shrugged it off and kept that iconic smile on his lips. "I don't know what you mean. This is just how I am." He shoved his hands into his pockets. I once again rolled my eyes in annoyance before I headed into the coffee shop. Of course, Colt was right behind me. As we stepped inside, the bell sounded, signaling Oliver to glance over at me with a small nod before he went back to his customer. When he saw Colt, of course, he gave me an amused smile. That jackass. He thought the whole situation was funny. We took a seat at the nearest table, waiting for Oliver to finish up. "All right, so your total will be $6.50, ma'am," Oliver said, giving the girl a small smile. "Yes, of course," she said, handing over the money along with a slip of paper. In exchange, he handed her the coffee. "Thank you. Please come back any time," he said. "Oh, I will." She winked at him. "You just better be here." Luckily, she left before I started gagging. Oliver looked down at the piece of paper in his hand and sighed before he crumpled it up, tossing it in the trash. I got up from the table. "You know, with all the girls that are interested in you, I still don't get why you are so set on Cece," I teased Oliver as we approached the counter, who was wearing the dorky uniform that was forced on us. It was a white button-up shirt that was tucked into a pair of black dress pants. He had the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Over that he wore a dark brown apron with the dorky logo stitched onto the right side of it. "Shh, not so loud," Oliver hissed as he looked around quickly to make sure no one heard. Cece did come in from time to time, and she was well known. I laughed at him and shook my head. "Everyone already knows," I told him. "No, they don't," he said. "Dude, even I could tell, and I barely know you," Colt added from beside me. Oliver's cheeks went red. "Just shut up, both of you," he mumbled. "So you're getting off now, right?" I asked. We had plans, after all. Oliver bit his lip, looking away and rubbing the back of his neck. That was not a good sign. Actually, I agreed to work a few extra hours." "What? Oliver, we had plans today. Why would you do that?" I hissed, glaring daggers at him. It wasn't only that, though. I needed to tell him about the unwanted house guests we had in our living room. I was sure Cece hadn't said a word to him yet. "You know, I need the extra money, and besides, it's not like you'll be lonely," he said, glancing at Colt. "Oh, no. Did you do this? Stop trying to set me up with this stalker." I was positive that he had called Colt beforehand. The timing was too perfect. "I'm standing right here, you know," Colt responded from beside me. "Yeah, unfortunately, I know." I turned my glare on him. "Then it's settled. Hang out with Colt for now and come back later," Oliver said with a smile. "See, I like the way this guy thinks," Colt replied as he took my hand without my permission. He began pulling me to the door. Wait, what?" "Oliver, this isn't over," I growled as Colt dragged me out of the shop. Oliver just smiled and waved. That bastard, the traitor. Colt. "Looks like it's just you and me, babe." I pulled Mel down the street with me. "Ew, stop. I am not your babe." She struggled, trying to pry my fingers off her wrist. "No, you stop." I released her. "This whole hard-to-get thing is ridiculous. I'm aware I come on strong, but I've been trying to get to know you. You haven't even given me the chance." "Why should I have to?" Mel stepped away. "Because you can't go through life alone. Right now all you have is Oliver. Is he the only friend you ever want?" "I have Cece too," Mel defended. "Family doesn't count. They are stuck with you no matter what. I'm not stuck with you. I genuinely want to know you. I'm putting in an effort to get you to open up." "Why?" She looked away, a dejected expression on her face. "Why?" I paused, running my fingers through my hair in frustration. Someone had hurt her in the past. Her scars were showing. "Because you're interesting, beautiful, and spunky as all hell. There is so much more to you than even you know." Mel, stunned, speechless, just stared at me for a moment. I took that as cooperation, grabbing her hand and pulling her with me. "We're going somewhere special." We had walked only a few blocks and made a few turns before I stopped in front of an old house, my house. I wanted her to see how I lived, my low-income, broken, fatherless family. I needed to see if she would be able to accept me for who I was before I allowed myself to feel something special for her. "Where are we?" Her bright eyes glanced around nervously. I didn't live in a good neighborhood. "My home," I answered, pulling her through the unlocked front door. "Mom," I called out as we entered. "Colton, you're home!" my wonderful but weary mother exclaimed, coming to greet me. "Oh, who is, She trailed off, getting a better look at Mel. "Price? Melissa?" "This is Mel," I answered. "Oh my goodness! Why would you bring her here? This place is a disaster. I'm so sorry." My mother ran off, and I could hear her fussing around the kitchen. But before we could move an inch, my mother was back in the entry with us. "Come on in, honey. I'm sorry." We followed my mother into the kitchen and sat at the creaky table. Thanks," Mel said as my mother handed her a bottle of water. "You're very welcome, dear. I'm Lisa, by the way." Why have you kids come here without any notice?" my mom asked, the last part to me specifically, her hollow gray eyes scolding. "I wanted to introduce Mel to you," I answered with a shrug. "You could have given me some warning. I would have cleaned up." There was a sharp note in my mother's voice. She was nervous. My mother was very involved in the Coven. It was her life, and she revered the Prices. Within our Coven, the leaders of each family would get together around once every few months. Denise Price was our pathfinder, the leader of our Coven. The rest of our family members were not allowed to go to the meetings unless there was an emergency, partially because of how large the Coven was. The meetings took place in a huge underground cavern that was hidden near Silver Lake. That's actually how our Coven got the name Silver Lake Coven. Because of the way our Coven worked, not very many of us kids knew each other. We never really had the chance to meet, and there had never been a summoning, which was when every witch and warlock from every family in the Coven was called together. A summoning hadn't happened in over 100 years. "Well, I'll remember that next time," I smiled sarcastically at her. "I'm taking Mel upstairs, but if you need anything, just yell." I led Mel to my small room and shut the door. She walked around and examined things while I lounged on my bed. "This is what you call someplace special?" she asked, lifting an eyebrow at me. "It's special to me." "I see," she bit her lip. "So why did you bring me here?" "Just because." I jumped up. "I almost forgot. Fitz!" Yanking my door open, I ran across the hall and found my floppy-eared bunny Fitz sitting in his cage. Fitz was my familiar, a black and white rabbit. I picked the lazy oaf up and carried him over to Mel. "What is that, hairball?" "It's Fitz, my familiar. He's lazy." I cradled Fitz like a baby, and Mel just burst out laughing, loud enough to scare the crap out of my poor baby. Mel. I was uncomfortable, but not for the reasons one would think. It wasn't the old house or the wary mother. It wasn't the fact that I was in a man's room alone. It wasn't that he lived differently from me. It was the fact that he trusted me enough to share his life. He wanted to take the time to get to know me, even though I had done nothing but push him away. There was something about his persistence, cute but annoying. I bursted into a fit of laughter at the fluffy rabbit he had in his arms. He held it like a baby. I didn't expect this from him at all. I shook my head, still giggling. When was the last time I laughed like this? I couldn't remember. "Fitz, huh?" I asked slowly, reaching out to pet the fluff ball. "Reminds me of Yo-Yo. He's just as fluffy," I said softly. Colt looked at me, raising an eyebrow. "Yo-Yo?" he asked. I nodded, and pulled my phone from my pocket, showing off a picture of my cat. "This is Yo-Yo, my familiar, and a lazy ass. He doesn't like anyone, really." Colt chuckled at that and smirked. "I bet he'd like me," he said. "I'll have to come over." I rolled my eyes, slipping my phone back into my pocket. "Who says I'd let you come over?" I asked, crossing my arms. He stood, looking down at me. He kept that smirk on his lips. "I'll just invite myself, or I'll ask Cece. She'll let me in." His confidence was astounding. "There is no need for that. You can come over." I blushed, looking away. "Wait, really? You aren't going to fight me?" he asked, a bit confused. "Shut up, or I'll take it back," I exclaimed before we walked back to his room. I sat down on his bed, now looking at him as he held Fitz. I had so many questions and wondered if he'd answer me. "Your mother is very nice," I said, looking away with my hands in my lap. "Yeah, she's great," he said, plopping down next to me. We were quiet for a few minutes. I wasn't sure what to say. "Look, if you have something to say, you should just say it," he prodded, and I could feel his eyes on me. He could read me like a book, and that was rather weird. No one was that good. It took Oliver and Cece years of practice to read me. My own mother couldn't even do it. I sighed and looked at him. "So, tell me about yourself," I said. "Why is it just you and your mom?" He was putting in an effort to know me, so maybe I should try to do the same. I was starting to get curious about him either way. Colt. "Well, my father," I trailed. How could I explain this to someone who had perfect parents? "He was abusive. He would hurt my mother. Sometimes me too, but mostly my mother. She would protect me." I paused again, trying to gauge Mel's reaction. "And I was always what he would call scrawny as a kid. It wasn't until I was 15 that I got some muscle and grew a few inches. That was also around the time that he tried to burn down our house with my mother still inside. I fought him off and ended up sending all the dogs in the neighborhood after him. Mel's gasp pulled at my heart. Did she pity me now? I didn't want pity. I can't believe someone would try to kill their own family. Well, the problem was that my mother never told him that she was a witch. It wasn't until I was born that I realized something was weird. You see, my power is that I can communicate with animals. I started literally talking to our family dog, and it would listen. It would also do anything I asked. That just freaked him out. Eventually he figured out what we were, and he said that we should all burn in hell because we were monsters. That sounds similar to Oliver's situation. Though he wasn't born a warlock, his father was part of our coven. When his mom found out that Jeff was a warlock, she ran, leaving Oliver behind, and never came back, which left Jeff an empty shell of his former self. He doesn't even move from the living room recliner most days. Oliver pays the bills and fixes up the house when it needs. Her eyes locked with mine as she spoke, and there was no pity there. Anyway, you're obviously better off without your scumbag of a father. Yeah, I agreed with a smile. That explained why Oliver took on overtime the second it was offered. As I was about to say something else, we were interrupted. Witches and warlocks of the Silver Lake Coven, listen closely. This is your Pathfinder, and I am summoning you all to the caverns for an emergency meeting tonight after sundown. 3 witches have been murdered and another attacked. Be very careful and aware of your surroundings. Cast whatever protections needed on the younglings, but they need to be present as well. A very authoritative voice echoed around us. 3 murders? Oh, hell. Last night we only knew of 2, Mel exclaimed after her mother finished speaking to us mentally. Was that a real summoning? I asked in awe. The summoning wasn't just her asking all the witches and warlocks of the coven to come to the meeting, but it was like a spell that required us to come. The spell itself would ensure that our bodies forced us to go to the caverns at the time she wanted us there. All we had to do was hear her, and it would take effect. It was very complicated and ancient spells, and only used in emergencies. Yeah. My father must have found something that really freaked him out last night if he was able to talk her into doing a summoning. Mel bit her lip, worry lining her face. Don't worry, we'll figure this out tonight.